When Tony Stark wakes up in Warhammer 40K and sees the Imperium's ancient ritualistic technology, he makes the most dangerous statement ever spoken on a Forge world. I can build better. But when his Primarch-grade combat suit becomes possessed by a chaos god and turns against him, the galaxy faces a terrifying question. What happens when the man who could save humanity becomes the weapon that destroys it? The first thing Tony Stark noticed when he woke up was the smell. Not the clean, filtered air of his Malibu workshop. Not even the recycled atmosphere of the cave in Afghanistan, where his nightmare had begun years ago. This was different. Oil, mixed with incense. Burning metal, mixed with something that smelled like rotting meat. The air tasted like copper and ash. His head pounded. His chest ached where the arc reactor should have been glowing steadily. When he tried to move his arms, he found them chained to a wall with thick metal cuffs. The metal was rough, covered in strange symbols that hurt his eyes when he tried to focus on them. The chains rattled against corroded iron as he tested their strength. Strong, very strong. Tony's eyes adjusted to the dim red light that filled the chamber. What he saw made no sense. The room was massive, easily 200 feet across, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadow and smoke. Machines lined every wall, but they were unlike any machines he had ever seen. Pistons the size of cars pumped rhythmically. Gears as tall as houses ground against each other with screaming metal sounds. Pipes thick enough to drive a truck through ran across the ceiling, leaking steam and fluids he could not identify. But it was the people that truly confused him. Figures in dark red robes moved between the machines. They were not quite human anymore. One had metal tentacles instead of arms. Another had replaced half its face with a mechanical skull that clicked and whirred as it turned. A third floated past on a platform of hovering metal, its lower body completely gone, replaced by a tangle of cables and pistons. "Where the hell am I?" Tony muttered. His voice sounded small in the vast chamber. One of the robed figures turned toward him. It glided closer on mechanical legs that hissed with each step. When it spoke, its voice came from a speaker built into its chest, crackling with static. "The blessed machine has awakened," it said. The words were English, but twisted somehow. Wrong. The false construct speaks. Tony's mind raced. He had been in his workshop. There had been an experiment with the Tesseract energy signatures he had been tracking. A flash of blue light. Pain. Then nothing. Now this. "Look, I don't know what kind of costume party this is," Tony said, forcing confidence into his voice that he did not feel. "But I've got places to be. So if you could just point me toward the exit, I'll be on my way." The mechanical figure tilted its head at an angle that would have broken a normal person's neck. "It does not understand. The false construct believes itself free." More robed figures gathered around him now. A dozen mechanical eyes focused on his chest, where the arc reactor glowed softly through his shirt. Tony looked down and felt a cold fear settle in his stomach. The reactor was damaged. Cracks spider-webbed across its surface. The light flickered weakly instead of shining steady and bright. "The divine machine spirit," one of the figures whispered. "It carries a divine machine spirit unlike any we have witnessed." "Blessed technology," another said, reaching out a metal hand toward Tony's chest. "Unknown to the archives. Unknown to the Omnissiah." Tony jerked away from the reaching hand. "Touch the arc reactor and you'll regret it," he warned. But his heart was beating faster now. These people, these things, were talking about his technology like it was magic, like it was holy. The first figure, apparently the leader, spoke in its crackling voice. "You are a standard template, construct, a lost intelligence from the dark age of technology. You will be studied, understood. Your secrets will be extracted and added to our knowledge." "I'm not a template anything," Tony said. "I'm Tony Stark, billionaire, genius, philanthropist, occasionally Avenger. And I built this technology myself, with my own 2 hands and my own brain." The figures went silent. Then, As one, they began to laugh. The sound was horrible, mechanical and broken, like gears grinding against each other. "It believes it created the technology," one said. "Heresy," another whispered. "The machine spirit has corrupted its logic centers," the leader declared. "We will repair it through sacred disassembly." Tony understood then, with terrible clarity. These people were going to take him apart. They were going to cut open his chest, remove the arc reactor, study it piece by piece. They thought he was some kind of ancient computer, some lost relic from a civilization they did not understand. "Wait," Tony said quickly. "Wait. I can help you. I can show you how the technology works. You don't need to disassemble anything." The leader considered this. Its mechanical eyes whirred as they focused on Tony's face. "You will demonstrate your function?" "Absolutely," Tony said. "Just let me out of these chains. Give me some tools." "Basic materials. I'll show you exactly what I can do." The figures conferred in a language of clicks and binary code that Tony's mind automatically tried to translate. He caught fragments: probability of escape, value of active demonstration, risk assessment. Finally, the leader turned back to him. "You will be permitted limited freedom. You will construct a device to prove your value. If you fail, disassembly will proceed immediately." The chains released with a hiss of hydraulics. Tony rubbed his wrist where the metal had cut into his skin. His chest ached. The arc reactor was failing faster than he wanted to admit. He had days at most before the shrapnel reached his heart. Maybe less in this place. Wherever this was, they led him through corridors that seemed to go on forever. The Forge world, he learned from their crackling conversations, was called Metallicus Prime, a planet covered entirely in factories and foundries. The sky outside the rare windows was choked with smoke and ash. 3 moons hung in the darkness, each one covered in industrial structures that glowed with furnace light. The figures brought him to a workshop of sorts. But calling it a workshop was like calling the Grand Canyon a ditch. The room stretched for what must have been half a mile. Ancient machines filled every space. Some looked like they had not been used in centuries. Dust-covered surfaces, rust-aided joints and connections. "You have 1 week," the leader said. "Construct something of value, or be deconstructed yourself." Then they left him alone, sealed behind a massive door marked with more of those eye-hurting symbols. Tony stood in the center of the workshop and turned slowly, taking it all in. This was bad. This was really bad. No Jarvis, no connection to his servers, no idea where he was or how he had gotten here. A damaged arc reactor that would kill him if he did not fix it soon, and a deadline to build something impressive for people who thought technology was magic. He walked to the nearest workbench and examined the tools. They were crude by his standards, but functional. Hammers, wrenches, cutting torches that ran on some kind of promethium fuel. He found materials stacked in bins, metal plates, wire, power cells that hummed with energy he did not recognize. Tony picked up one of the power cells and turned it over in his hands. It was warm to the touch. The energy signature was similar to, but not quite like anything he had worked with before. More raw, less controlled. He set it down carefully and continued his search. In a corner, covered by a tarp, he found something that made his breath catch. Armor, but not like any armor he had ever seen. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, made of a dark metal that seemed to drink in the light. The chest plate was as thick as his fist. The helmet had eye lenses that glowed faintly red, even though the suit was clearly unpowered. Tony ran his hand over the metal. It was cold, impossibly cold, and covered in those same painful symbols. "What are you?" he whispered. A voice behind him made him jump. "Heretic armor. Traitor tech." Tony spun to find a figure in the doorway. This one was different from the others. Its robes were cleaner, its mechanical parts fewer. It still had one human eye left, pale blue and watching him carefully. "I thought I was alone," Tony said. "You are never alone on a Forge world," the figure replied. Its voice was less mechanical, more human. The machine spirits watch everything. I am Archmagos Epsilon 7. I have been assigned to observe your work. Great. A babysitter. A witness. Epsilon 7 corrected. When you fail, I will. Document the manner of your failure for the archives. Tony smiled, despite the situation. You know what? I've heard that before. From better critics than you. He turned back to the workshop, his mind already racing through possibilities. He needed to fix the arc reactor first. Then he needed to build something impressive enough to keep these people from cutting him open. And if he was very lucky, he needed to figure out where he was and how to get home. Tony Stark got to work. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, sorting materials, testing connections, building the framework for something new. Around him, the ancient machines of the Forge world hummed their endless songs. Above him, through the smoke-stained windows, 3 moons watched with cold industrial light. He did not know it yet, but his next words would change everything. As Epsilon 7 watched him work through that first night, Tony paused at his workbench. He held up a circuit board covered in religious symbols and ritual markings. The frustration finally broke through. This is insane, he said. You're worshipping technology instead of understanding it. That's not faith. That's fear. He looked at Epsilon 7 directly. I can build better. The workshop went silent. Somewhere in the distance, an alarm began to sound. The alarm stopped as suddenly as it had started. Epsilon 7 stood perfectly still in the doorway, his remaining human eye fixed on Tony with an expression that might have been shock or might have been fascination. The mechanical half of his face revealed nothing, just clicking gears and whirring lenses. You should not have said that, Epsilon 7 whispered finally. Those words are the definition of tech heresy. I should report you immediately for ritual cleansing. Tony set down the circuit board and crossed his arms. But you're not going to. Are you? The Archmagos was quiet for a long moment. His mechanical components hummed softly as he processed this question. No, he said at last. I am not. Because I have had the same thought every day for the past 43 years, and I have hated myself for thinking it. Over the next 3 days, an unlikely partnership formed. Epsilon 7 began visiting the workshop more frequently, staying longer each time. He brought Tony materials that were not in the original inventory. Better metals, cleaner power sources, and most importantly, information. The Imperium spans 1,000,000 worlds. Epsilon 7 explained as Tony worked on rebuilding his arc reactor. But our technology has not advanced in 10,000 years. We maintain what we have. We worship the machines of the past. But we create nothing new. Tony carefully extracted the damaged core from his chest. The pain was sharp and immediate. Blood trickled down his skin as he worked. Why? He asked through gritted teeth. Why stop innovating? Fear, Epsilon 7 said simply. In the age of technology, humanity built thinking machines, artificial intelligences. They rebelled, nearly destroyed us. Since then, true innovation has been labeled heresy. We follow the rituals. We pray to the machine spirits. We change nothing. Tony installed the new core he had built. It was crude compared to his normal work, but it would keep him alive. The glow steadied in his chest. He took a deep breath and felt the shrapnel held safely away from his heart once more. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, he said. And I once watched Thor try to use a toaster. Epsilon 7's human eye widened. Thor? You speak of gods as if you know them personally. Where I come from, gods are just really powerful people with PR teams, Tony said. He looked at the Archmagos carefully. You said the Imperium has warrior demigods, the Primarchs. Tell me about them. What Epsilon 7 showed him next changed everything. The Archmagos accessed a hidden data vault, projecting holographic images into the air above them. 20 figures appeared, each one different, each one magnificent. They stood twice as tall as normal men. Their armor gleamed with power and purpose. In the recordings, they moved through battlefields like forces of nature, crushing enemies that would have destroyed entire armies. The Emperor created them. Epsilon 7 explained. 20 sons, each designed for a specific purpose. Generals, warriors, leaders. Half turned traitor 10,000 years ago. The loyal half are dead or missing. The Imperium has tried for millennia to recreate their perfection. We have failed every time. Tony watched the holograms with growing excitement. He saw the servo motors in their armor, the power sources that let them fight for days without rest, the force fields that turned aside bullets and blades. His mind was already breaking down the components, understanding the principles, seeing how it could be done better. "Show me everything," Tony said. "Every technical specification you have. Every fragment of their armor. Everything." "That information is restricted at the highest levels," Epsilon 7 said. "Accessing it would be tech heresy?" Tony finished. "Yeah, I'm getting that's pretty much my brand now." "Show me anyway." Epsilon 7 hesitated only a moment before his mechanical fingers began dancing across control panels. More data flooded the holographic displays. Schematics, material compositions, power output readings. It was incomplete, fragmented, like trying to rebuild a car from pictures in a magazine. But it was enough. It was more than enough. "I can do this," Tony said quietly. "I can build armor that gives normal humans Primarch-level capabilities. Miniaturize the power source using my arc reactor design. Reinforce the servos with nanotech integration. Add repulsor technology for enhanced striking force. I can make your soldiers into demigods." "Impossible," Epsilon 7 breathed. But he did not sound like he believed his own word. "Epsilon," Tony said, using the Archmagos' name for the first time. "You said you've been thinking heretical thoughts for 43 years. Help me prove that innovation isn't evil. Help me show the Imperium that progress doesn't have to mean destruction." The Archmagos' remaining human eye glistened with something that might have been tears. "If we fail, we will both be executed. Our names will be erased. Our works destroyed." Tony grinned. "So basically Tuesday for me. Are you in or out?" Epsilon 7 extended a hand that was half flesh, half metal. Tony shook it. "I will take you somewhere," the Archmagos said. "A place that should not exist. A forge that was hidden during the heresy and forgotten. It contains materials that have not been seen in 10,000 years. They traveled through the underbelly of the forge world in secret, down corridors that were not on any map, through passages sealed with doors that Epsilon 7 opened with codes he should not have known. The air grew colder the deeper they went. The walls changed from industrial metal to ancient stone carved with symbols even older than the Imperium. Finally, they reached a vault door 30 feet tall. Epsilon 7 placed his hands on scanning panels. Lights flickered to life for the first time in millennia. The door groaned open, revealing a chamber beyond that made Tony's breath catch. The hidden forge was pristine. Where the workshop above had been crude and dirty, this place gleamed. Workbenches of black marble held tools that looked brand new despite their impossible age. Storage containers lined the walls, each one labeled in a language Tony could not read but somehow understood. The labels spoke of materials he had only dreamed about. Auramite, the gold that the Emperor's personal guards wore. Ceramite in its purest form. Adamantium, without flaw. Power sources that hummed with barely contained energy. "This is a Primarch forge," Epsilon 7 said reverently. "One of the original workshops where the Emperor's sons were equipped. I discovered it by accident 20 years ago. I have told no one." Tony walked between the workbenches like a kid in a candy store. His fingers traced over tools designed for hands larger than human. His mind cataloged everything he saw, already planning, already building. "How much time do we have?" He asked. "The others expect you to fail within days," Epsilon 7 said. "They will. Come to check your progress soon. After that, if you have produced nothing of value, they will disassemble you as promised. Then we better work fast. For 6 days and 6 nights, Tony Stark did what he did best. He built. But this time, he was not alone. Epsilon 7 worked beside him, his knowledge of Imperium technology combining with Tony's innovative genius. They barely slept. They ate ration bars that tasted like cardboard mixed with motor oil. They worked until their hands bled and their eyes burned from the welding light. The Mark I Primarch combat suit took shape piece by piece. Tony used the ancient oromite for the base frame, alloying it with materials from his world's periodic table that Epsilon 7 had never heard of. He built a miniaturized arc reactor into the chest, then reinforced it with ceramite plating 3 inches thick. The servo motors were hybrids, combining the Imperium's time-tested designs with his own nanotech enhancements. The helmet gave him the most trouble. Primarch armor needed sensor arrays that could track 100 targets simultaneously. Tony built in heads-up displays, threat assessment computers, and communication systems. But everything had to be bigger, stronger, more powerful than his normal suits. This armor was not for him. It was designed for soldiers who would face the worst horrors the galaxy could offer. On the morning of the 7th day, they were putting the final touches on the prototype when alarms blared throughout the Forge world. Not the simple warning from before. This was different. This was the sound of war. Epsilon 7 checked his data feeds, his mechanical components processing information faster than any human could read. His human eye went wide with fear. "Orcs," he said. "A WAGH has translated into the system. Hundreds of ships, millions of warriors. They will be here within hours." "What are orcs?" Tony asked, sealing the last power coupling on the armor. "Fungal warrior species. Epsilon 7 explained quickly. They live only for battle. The more they fight, the bigger and stronger they grow. Their technology should not work by any logical principle, but it does because they believe it will. They are coming for the Forge world. They will strip it for parts and kill everyone they find." Tony looked at the armor standing before him. It was not finished. Not really. He had planned for weeks of testing, months of refinement. But people were about to die, and he had something that might help. "Help me get this thing to the surface," Tony said. "You cannot pilot it," Epsilon 7 protested. "It is designed for someone larger, stronger. The neural interface alone would kill a normal human. Good thing I'm not planning to pilot it myself." Tony was already moving, grabbing tools, making adjustments. "We need a volunteer. Someone big. Someone trained to use power armor. You have Space Marines on this world?" "A small garrison," Epsilon 7 said. 50 warriors of the Iron Hands. Chapter. But they will never agree to use untested technology. It goes against every protocol. Then, we better be really convincing. They transported the armor to the surface using cargo elevators that groaned under its weight. The Mark I was massive, standing nearly 9 feet tall and weighing close to 2 tons. It took both of them and a team of servitors to move it. Outside, the sky was burning. Orc ships were entering the atmosphere, trailing fire and smoke. They were crude vessels, little more than asteroids with engines strapped to them. But there were so many, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, blotting out the 3 moons. The Space Marine garrison was preparing for battle near the primary landing platforms. 50 warriors in power armor, the color of black iron. They moved with purpose and precision, checking weapons, reciting battle prayers, preparing to sell their lives as dearly as possible. Their sergeant turned as Tony and Epsilon 7 approached with the armor. He was massive, even by Space Marine standards. His face, a map of scars and augmetic replacements. When he spoke, his voice was like grinding stone. "Archmagos, this is no place for tech priests. Return to the shelters." "Sergeant Pharos," Epsilon 7 said formally, "I bring a gift from the Omnissiah, armor that will multiply your strength 10-fold, power that rivals the Primarchs of old." Sergeant Pharos looked at the Mark I suit. His expression was unreadable. Unknown technology, untested in battle. I would be a fool to trust it. The first orc pods began hitting the ground in the distance. Massive metal spheres that crashed through buildings and split open to release roaring green-skinned warriors. They were huge, some of them 8 or 9 feet tall, covered in slabs of muscle and crude metal armor. They carried weapons that looked like they had been assembled from scrap metal and raw violence. The sound of their war cries echoed across the forge world like thunder. "You're going to die," Tony said bluntly. 50 of you against millions of them. The math doesn't work. But with this armor, one of you becomes worth 1,000. Give me one volunteer. One warrior willing to take a chance. If it works, you might actually survive this. Sergeant Pharos was quiet for a long moment. More orc pods were landing now. Closer. The ground shook with each impact. In the distance, gunfire erupted as the first defenders engaged the enemy. "I will wear it," Pharos said finally. "If this is heresy, I will answer for it before the Emperor's throne." Getting a space marine into the armor took precious minutes they did not have. Pharos was already large, but the Mark I was designed for someone bigger still. Tony and Epsilon 7 made rapid adjustments, calibrating the neural interface, syncing the servo motors to Pharos's enhanced physiology. The reactor in the chest provides nearly unlimited power, Tony explained quickly. The repulsors in the gauntlets enhance striking force by a factor of 10. Targeting systems are neural-linked. Just think about what you want to hit, and the suit will help you hit it. The force field generator will absorb most incoming fire, but it can be overwhelmed. "Don't get cocky." "I am never cocky," Pharos said. "I am Iron Hands. We are certain." The armor sealed around him with a hiss of hydraulics. The arc reactor flared to life, bathing the area in blue-white light. Pharos took a step forward, and the ground cracked beneath his weight. He raised one armored hand and stared at it like he was seeing his own flesh for the first time. "By the Omnissiah," he whispered. "I feel like a god." "You're not," Tony said firmly. "You're just a man in a really good suit. Don't forget that." The first wave of orcs crested a nearby hill. There must have been 1,000 of them, a green tide of muscle and metal and rage. They saw the Space Marines and charged, roaring their enthusiasm for battle. Sergeant Pharos stepped forward to meet them. What happened next would be discussed in Forge World records for years to come. Pharos moved like lightning despite the armor's massive bulk. His fist, enhanced by repulsor technology, caught the first orc in the chest and sent it flying backward into a dozen of its fellows. The impact made a sound like a bomb going off. He waded into their ranks like a reaper through wheat. Each punch shattered bodies. Each step crushed enemies beneath adamantium feet. The orcs shot at him with their crude guns. Bullets sparked off the force field, doing no damage. They swung massive axes and cleavers. The ceramite plating turned aside blows that would have cut normal armor in half. But the armor was overheating. Tony could see it from the command post where he and Epsilon 7 watched. The thermal readings were climbing into the red zone. The arc reactor was stable, but the cooling systems could not keep up with the power demands. The armor had been built in 6 days. It was not ready for this kind of punishment. "He needs to fall back," Tony said. "The reactor is stable, but everything else is going to fail. He will not retreat," Epsilon 7 said quietly. "He is Space Marine. They know only advance or death." Pharos fought deeper into the orc horde. His battle brothers followed in his wake, cutting down enemies that he had scattered and broken. Together, they formed a spearhead that drove into the green tide like a knife. Then, the war boss appeared. It was massive, easily 12 feet tall, covered in armor made from the hulls of tanks. It carried an axe the size of a person. When it roared, the sound shook the air itself. Smaller orcs cleared a path for it, fearful and reverent at once. Pharos turned to face it. Even in the Primarch armor, he looked small next to this monster. They charged at each other. Pharos's repulsor-enhanced fist met the warboss's armor with a sound like planets colliding. The warboss staggered, but did not fall. Its axe came down in a massive overhead swing. Pharos, caught it on his armored forearm. The ceramite cracked. Warning runes flashed across his display. They grappled, god and monster, surrounded by the bodies of lesser warriors. The warboss was stronger, but Pharaoh's had technology on his side. His suit's servo motors whined at maximum capacity. The arc reactor blazed like a star in his chest. With a roar that echoed across the battlefield, Pharaoh lifted the warboss off its feet. Then, he slammed it into the ground with enough force to create a crater. Once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th impact, something in the armor gave way. The right arm's servo motors failed completely. Hydraulic fluid sprayed from ruptured lines. The force field generator overloaded in a shower of sparks. But the warboss was dead, its massive body broken and still. Pharaoh stood over it, his armor steaming and sparking. The remaining orcs, seeing their leader dead, lost cohesion. Some fled. Others fought among themselves to determine who would lead next. The space. Marines pressed their advantage, driving the greenskins back toward their landing sites. When the immediate battle ended, Pharaoh collapsed. Tech priests rushed forward to extract him from the damaged armor. He was alive, but barely. Burns covered his body where the cooling systems had failed. His enhanced physiology had kept him conscious through trauma that would have killed a normal human 10 times over. They carried him away to the Medicaid facilities. Tony stood beside the wrecked armor, his hands on his hips, assessing the damage. It was extensive. The right arm was destroyed. The force field generator was slag. Multiple armor plates had been breached, but the arc reactor still glowed steadily in the chest. The core design was sound. It worked. Epsilon 7 said quietly, "Against all probability, your design worked." "It worked once," Tony corrected. "Against one threat. It's not ready." Not even close. But word was already spreading across the Forge world. The warrior in the spry, golden armor who had killed a warboss. The new technology that had saved them. Within hours, representatives from other Imperial organizations began arriving. Admirals from the Navy, generals from the Guard. Even a delegation from the Adeptus Mechanicus hierarchy, drawn by reports of Epsilon 7's Forbidden Forge. They all wanted the same thing. They wanted the armor. They wanted what Tony Stark had built. Standing in the ruins of his first prototype, covered in soot and orc blood, Tony Stark smiled. "Guess I'm not getting disassembled today," he said. But in the shadows between worlds, something else had taken notice. In the Imperium, in the realm of chaos where daemons plotted and gods schemed, an entity of change and ambition turned its many eyes toward the Forge world. It saw the arc reactor's light. It saw the innovation. It saw opportunity. Siench, the changer of ways, began to laugh. The nightmares began 3 days after the orc attack. Tony would close his eyes and see equations written in fire. Designs for weapons that should not exist. Improvements to the armor that made perfect sense in the dream but filled him with unease when he woke. The voice that whispered these secrets was smooth and patient, like a teacher guiding a favored student. "You can do so much more," it said in his dreams. "The arc reactor is merely the beginning. I can show you technologies that will make gods weep with envy." Tony woke covered in sweat, his heart racing. The arc reactor in his chest pulsed with steady blue light. Around him, the hidden forge was quiet except for the hum of machines. Epsilon 7 had given him quarters here, away from the other tech priests who still whispered about heresy and wanted him interrogated by the Inquisition. He rubbed his eyes and checked the time. 4 in the morning, local planetary rotation. He had slept 3 hours. That was more than the last 2 nights combined. The dreams were getting worse, more vivid, more tempting. Tony got up and splashed water on his face from a basin. The water was cold and tasted of metal. He looked at himself in the polished steel mirror. His eyes had dark circles under them. His hands shook slightly. He told himself it was just exhaustion, just stress, just the pressure of building something that could change the fate of an entire civilization. But he knew better. Something was wrong. Work on the Mark 7 had consumed every waking moment since the battle. The Mechanicus hierarchy had given him official sanction, though their approval came wrapped in restrictions and observers. They wanted the armor, but they feared what it represented. Change, progress, innovation without prayer. The new suit was beautiful. Tony had learned from the Mark I's failures. He had reinforced every weak point, improved every system, made it sleeker and more deadly. The design borrowed from his classic Iron Man aesthetic, but adapted for the brutal reality of this universe. The color scheme was gold and red, mixing the Imperial palette with his own signature look. It stood in the center of the forge, like a shrine to human achievement. The arc reactor at its heart was 3 times more powerful than the one in his chest. The repulsor systems could punch through tank armor. Grav field generators built into the boots would allow flight, something the Imperium's power armor had never achieved. The shoulder-mounted weapon was a conversion beamer, capable of converting matter directly into energy at range. And the force field, the Iron Halo as Epsilon 7 called it, could withstand fire that would vaporize normal armor. Tony walked around the suit, checking connections, running diagnostics. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. He had worked on this for only 2 weeks, but it felt like he had been building it for months. The design had flowed from his mind like water, each solution presenting itself before he even fully understood the problem. "You are awake early." Epsilon 7's voice came from the doorway. The Archmagos approached with his distinctive half-mechanical gait. "Or perhaps you did not sleep at all." "Little of both," Tony admitted. "I wanted to run final checks before the demonstration. The Inquisitorial delegation arrives at noon," Epsilon 7 said. "They will want to see the armor in action. They will want to determine if it is blessed by the Emperor or tainted by darker forces." Tony's stomach tightened at those words. "And what do you think?" Epsilon 7 was quiet for a moment. His human eye studied Tony carefully. "I think you have built something magnificent, but I also think you have changed since the battle. You work faster, sleep less. Sometimes I hear you talking to yourself, though you claim you are alone." "I'm processing out loud," Tony said defensively. "It's how I think." "Perhaps." Epsilon 7 did not sound convinced. "But be careful during the demonstration. The Inquisition looks for any sign of corruption, any hint of chaos influence. They will execute you on suspicion alone." The demonstration was scheduled for the Forge World's primary testing grounds, a vast arena of reinforced steel where weapons were proven before being sent to war. By the time Tony arrived, hundreds of observers had gathered. Tech priests in their red robes, space marines from 3 different chapters, Imperial Guard officers in their formal uniforms. And at the center of it all, the Inquisitors. There were 3 of them, each representing a different faction within the Inquisition. They wore black armor, decorated with skulls and purity seals. Their faces were hard and suspicious. They radiated authority and the absolute certainty that they spoke for the Emperor himself. The lead Inquisitor was a woman named Covenant. She was tall and thin, with hair as white as bone and eyes that seemed to look through rather than at people. When she spoke, her voice carried across the arena without amplification. "Tony Stark," she said, "you stand accused of tech heresy, of innovation without sanction, of building weapons using principles unknown to the Mechanicus and therefore suspect. You will demonstrate this armor. You will submit to questioning. Then we will determine your fate." Tony stood beside the Mark 7, one hand resting on its golden surface. He had faced down worse than religious police. He had testified before Congress. He had stared down Thanos. But something about these Inquisitors made his skin crawl. They were not interested in truth. They were interested in conformity. "The armor speaks for itself," Tony said. "Let me show you what it can do." He climbed into the suit. The neural interface connected smoothly, feeding information directly into his brain. Power levels, weapons, status, threat assessment. It was like slipping into a second skin. The arc reactor flared to life, and Tony felt invincible. The test began with basic mobility. Tony, Walked, ran, jumped. The armor responded like an extension of his own body. The observers murmured among themselves, impressed despite their suspicion. Then he activated the grav field generators. He rose into the air. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Half the observers dropped to their knees. Some began praying. Others made signs against evil. In the Imperium, flight was the domain of jump-pack troops and aircraft. To see a man in armor hovering like a bird defied their understanding of how the universe should work. Tony flew in a circle around the arena, getting a feel for the controls. The grav fields were stable. Power consumption was within acceptable limits. He descended and landed with barely a sound despite the armor's weight. "Target practice," announced one of the Mechanicus overseers. A series of heavy combat servitors rolled into the arena. They were massive cyborg creatures, more machine than human, armed with weapons that could shred normal armor. Tony raised his hands. The repulsors in his palms glowed blue-white. Twin beams of concentrated energy struck the first servitor, punching clean through its armored chest. It collapsed, systems failing. He moved to the next target, then the next, each shot precise and devastating. The shoulder-mounted conversion beamer activated with a high-pitched whine. Tony targeted a reinforced bunker at the far end of the arena. The beam lanced out, and where it touched, matter simply ceased to exist. A hole 10 feet across appeared in the bunker's wall, edges glowing white-hot. The demonstration continued for an hour. Every weapons system performed flawlessly. Every defensive measure worked as designed. By the end, even the most skeptical observers were impressed. Tony had built something that rivaled the legendary war machines of the Imperium's golden age. He landed in the center of the arena and deactivated the armor. As the chest plate opened and he stepped out, he could not help but smile. This was what he did. This was what he was good at, building impossible things and making them look easy. Inquisitor Covenant approached, her white hair gleaming under the arena lights. "Impressive," she said. The word sounded like an accusation. "Perhaps too impressive. Where did you acquire the knowledge to build such a device?" "I designed it," Tony said, "using principles from my own reality combined with materials and technology from yours. It's called innovation." "Innovation?" Covenant repeated the word like it tasted foul. "Or perhaps instruction. Tell me, Tony Stark, do you hear voices? Do you dream of strange things? Do thoughts enter your mind that feel like they come from elsewhere?" Tony's blood went cold. How could she know? "Everyone dreams," he said carefully. "It doesn't mean anything." Covenant's eyes narrowed. "The warp touches all things, Mr. Stark, even those from other realities, especially those who build with such unnatural skill. I think something has taken an interest in you. I think you have been guided by forces you do not understand." Before Tony could respond, alarms blared across the Forge world. The sound was different from the orc attack, more urgent, more terrified. Tech priests rushed to data terminals. Space Marines moved to defensive positions. Epsilon 7 appeared at Tony's side, his mechanical components whirring with stress. "Warp translation," he said urgently. "Multiple signatures. Ship configurations unknown. They are broadcasting Imperial identification codes, but something is wrong. The codes are corrupted, twisted." On the arena's massive hololith display, images appeared of the approaching fleet. The ships were grotesque parodies of Imperial vessels, their hulls writhed with impossible geometries. Symbols covered their surfaces, symbols that hurt to look at directly. They moved through space in ways that violated every law of physics. "Chaos," Covenant said flatly. "A chaos warband. How did they know to come here? How did they know about the armor?" She turned to Tony, her hand moving to the bolt pistol at her hip. You are the beacon. Your technology has drawn them like moths to flame." Tony shook his head. "That's impossible. The arc reactor doesn't use warp energy. It's pure physics. Clean energy. Nothing is clean in this universe," Covenant said. "Everything touches the warp eventually. Your innovations have created ripples in reality itself. The dark gods have noticed. The lead chaos vessel began transmitting. The voice that came through the speakers made everyone in the arena flinch. It was wrong. Multiple tones speaking in harmony that should not be possible. It bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the mind. "Greetings, Metallicus Prime," the voice said. It sounded amused, delighted. "We are the Blood Disciples, faithful servants of Tzientch, the architect of fate. We have come for your new prophet of change. We have come for Tony Stark. Send him to us, and we will leave your world intact. Refuse, and we will take him by force, and your world will burn." The transmission ended. Silence filled the arena. Hundreds of eyes turned to Tony. Some looked at him with fear, others with anger. All with the same question: was he worth defending? Inquisitor Covenant made her decision quickly. Get him to the Void Shields. Lock down the forge. Prepare all defensive positions. We will not surrender anyone to chaos, even one tainted by their touch. She looked at Tony coldly. "But if I find proof you invited this attack, I will execute you myself." The next hours were chaos of a different kind. The Forge world mobilized for war. Space Marines took up positions at key defensive points. Imperial Guard regiments deployed to protect critical facilities. The tech priests activated defense systems that had not been used in centuries. Tony was confined to a secure chamber, deep underground. The walls were covered in symbols that Epsilon 7 said would block psychic influence. Guards stood outside the single door, bolters ready. He was protected, but he was also a prisoner. He sat on the simple cot and put his head in his hands. This was his fault. He had been so focused on building, on proving himself, on showing the Imperium what innovation could accomplish. He had not stopped to question where the ideas were coming from. The dreams, the whispers, the solutions that appeared fully formed in his mind. Something had been helping him, and now it wanted payment. The door opened. Epsilon 7 entered, followed by two robed figures Tony had not seen before. They moved strangely, their bodies hidden completely beneath layers of cloth. When they spoke, their voices were flat and emotionless. "We are Null Maidens," one said. "Sisters of Silence. We are psychic blanks. In our presence, the warp cannot touch you, cannot speak to you, cannot influence you. If you have been corrupted, we will know." They approached Tony, and as they got closer, he felt something change. The constant background hum he had not even realized was there suddenly went silent. His thoughts became clearer, sharper, and he realized with horror how much fog had been clouding his mind. "The armor," he said suddenly. "The Mark 7. Something's wrong with it. I see it now. There are patterns in the design, symbols hidden in the circuitry. I didn't put them there. I couldn't have. I don't even understand what they mean." Epsilon 7's human eye widened. Chaos, corruption, woven into the very design. If anyone had used that armor in battle, it would have opened a gateway, allowed possession. You did not build a weapon, Tony Stark. You built a trap. Tony felt sick. All his work, all his effort, all his pride in what he had accomplished, it had been tainted from the start. He was not a genius here. He was a puppet, a tool being used by forces that wanted to corrupt humanity from within. "We have to destroy it," he said. "The Mark 7. Destroy it before anyone tries to use it." "Too late," one of the Null Maidens said. She was listening to something on her communication device. "The Chaos Fleet has landed boarding craft. They are fighting through the outer defenses. Their target is the hidden forge. They want the armor intact. Then we hold them here." Covenant's voice came from the doorway. The Inquisitor entered, her face grim. "We make our stand at the forge. We keep them from the armor until we can destroy it properly. If they take it, they will mass-produce corrupted versions. They will spread this taint across 1,000 worlds." Tony stood up. "Let me fight. Give me one of the earlier prototypes. Something clean. Something I built before the corruption started. I can help. Covenant studied him for a long moment. Why should I trust you? You are the reason they are here. Because I'm also the only one who fully understands the armor's weaknesses, Tony said. I built it. I can help destroy it. And I can help you fight the things that are coming to claim it. The Inquisitor was quiet. Then she nodded once. Epsilon 7, take him to the forge. Get him equipped. But if I see any sign of corruption, any hesitation, I will kill him myself. They raced through the Forge World's corridors. Behind them, the sounds of battle grew louder. Explosions, gunfire, screaming. The Chaos forces were advancing faster than the defenders could stop them. They were not just warriors. They were Chaos Space Marines, traitors who had turned from the Emperor millennia ago. Each one was worth a dozen normal soldiers. The hidden forge was already under attack when they arrived. Chaos cultists had found the entrance somehow, guided by the same corrupted knowledge that had infected Tony's dreams. They wore ragged robes covered in symbols that writhed and changed when looked at directly. They chanted in languages that hurt to hear. The Space Marine defenders cut them down efficiently, but more kept coming. And behind them, something worse was approaching. Tony could hear it. A voice he recognized from his nightmares, now speaking in the waking world. Tony Stark, it called, echoing through the forge. Builder of wonders, I have guided you well, have I not? The armor is magnificent, a worthy offering to the god of change. Come, accept your reward, ascend to something greater than human. A figure stepped into the forge. It wore armor that had once been the blue of the Thousand Suns Legion, but was now covered in writhing script that glowed with its own light. The warrior stood 8 feet tall, his proportions wrong, too many joints in his limbs, too many eyes in his helmet. I am Kairos Mindweaver, the sorcerer announced, chosen of Tzinch. I have walked through your dreams, Tony Stark. I have seen your mind. Such potential. Such beautiful complexity. You could be so much more than human. Join us. Build wonders in the name of the Changer of Ways. Tony looked at the corrupted Space Marine. He looked at the Mark 7 armor, standing in the center of the forge, its golden surface now seeming sinister rather than heroic. He looked at Epsilon 7 and the defenders who were preparing to die to keep this technology from falling into Chaos hands. I've got a better idea, Tony said. He moved to one of the earlier prototypes, the Mark III, built in his first week on the Forge World, before the Whispers, before the corruption. It was crude compared to the Mark VII, bulkier, slower, but it was clean. He climbed inside and felt the familiar sensation of armor sealing around him. The arc reactor flared to life, not as powerful as the Mark VII. Not as advanced, but it was his. Truly his, built with his own mind unclouded by external influence. Let's see how your god likes it when I don't play along, Tony said. His voice boomed through the armor's speakers. Kairos Mindweaver laughed. The sound echoed with wrong harmonics that made reality shiver. Futile. You have already served our purpose. The armor is built. The pattern exists. Even if you destroy this, we have seen it. We will recreate it. Tzientch's gifts are eternal. Yeah? Tony raised the armor's arm toward the Mark VII. Let's test that theory. He fired every weapon the Mark III possessed at his greatest creation. Repulsors, missiles, lost beams. The Mark VII erupted in a fireball of devastating force. But as it burned, Tony saw something that made his heart sink. The fire was wrong. It burned blue and pink and colors that should not exist. The metal melted, but the patterns in its structure remained, burned into reality itself like a brand. The corruption was not just in the armor. It was in the knowledge, in the design, in every mind that had seen it built. Kairos was right. Even destroying it changed nothing. The damage was done. No. Tony whispered. Around him, the battle raged. But all he could see was the burning armor and the terrible realization of what he had become. Not a hero, not a savior, just another tool in an endless game played by gods who cared nothing for human suffering. The machine spirit in his Mark III armor suddenly stirred, and it was not alone. The presence in Tony's armor felt alien and cold. It probed at his mind through the neural interface, testing his defenses, looking for weaknesses. Tony fought to maintain control, his hands gripping the armor's internal controls so hard they ached. Around him, the battle for the forge intensified as more chaos cultists poured through the breached entrance. "Get out of my head!" Tony growled through gritted teeth. He forced the armor to step backward, away from the burning wreckage of the Mark VII. Each movement was a fight. The corrupted machine spirit wanted to walk forward, wanted to join with the demonic presence that swirled in the flames. Epsilon 7 was at his side instantly, mechadendrites extending from his back to interface with the Mark III's systems. "I am purging the corruption," the Archmago said urgently. "Hold on. Do not let it take control." Binary code flooded through the armor's processors. Epsilon 7 was fighting a digital war inside the suit's computer systems, erasing code that should not exist, severing connections that led to nowhere and everywhere at once. Tony felt the alien presence recoil, weakening, but not defeated. Kairos Mindweaver watched this struggle with amusement. "You cannot fight fate, Tony Stark. Tzeentch has already won. The knowledge exists. The design is recorded in 1,000 minds. Even if you destroy every physical copy, the idea remains. Ideas are immortal. Ideas can be forgotten," Inquisitor Covenant said. She stepped forward, flanked by her fellow Inquisitors. In her hands, she held a weapon that glowed with golden light, a force staff blessed by the Emperor himself. And those who carry corrupted knowledge can be silenced. Her meaning was clear. She would kill everyone who had seen the Mark VII's design. Every tech priest, every observer, every worker who had helped build it. Hundreds of people erased to keep the corruption from spreading. Tony's stomach turned. "You can't. These people are innocent." "Innocence is irrelevant," Covenant said coldly. "Survival is all that matters. The knowledge must die, even if that means killing those who carry it. There has to be another way," Tony insisted. The corrupted machine spirit had quieted, driven back by Epsilon 7's purge, but he could still feel it lurking at the edges of his consciousness. "I made this mess. Let me fix it." "How?" Covenant demanded. "The pattern is burned into reality itself. You saw it. Even destroying the armor changed nothing. The corruption persists." Tony's mind raced. He thought about the problem the way he always did, breaking it down into components. The Mark VII was corrupted because he had built it while under chaos influence. The design itself was a trap. But the core principles, the arc reactor technology, the repulsor systems, those were clean. They came from his own reality, from knowledge that predated any exposure to the warp. "I can rebuild it," Tony said slowly, "but different this time. I'll strip away everything I designed while corrupted. Go back to basics. Use only the core technology from my world, combined with your most basic, most proven systems. No innovations, no fancy additions. Just solid, reliable engineering." "And what makes you think you can work uncorrupted now?" Covenant asked. "How do you know the whispers will not return?" Tony looked at the Null Maidens who stood nearby. "Them. They blank out psychic influence. If I work in their presence, the warp can't touch me. I'll build something simple, something that can be mass-produced without requiring genius or innovation. Something so straightforward that any tech priest can build it by following basic instructions." Kairos. Mindweaver's laughter died. For the first time, the sorcerer sounded uncertain. "You would abandon your greatest work? Reduce yourself to a mere craftsman following recipes? That is not who you are, Tony Stark. You are an innovator, a creator of marvels." "No," Tony said firmly. The realization felt like waking from a long dream. "That's who I was in my world. Here, I'm something different. I'm just a guy with some knowledge that might help people survive. There's no glory in that. No press conferences. No fame. But maybe that's the point. Epsilon 7's human eyes studied Tony with an expression that might have been pride. You are learning wisdom. In this universe, the greatest achievements are often the smallest ones. The humble bolt that holds together a starship. The simple prayer that sustains faith. The anonymous worker who dies at his post, keeping the forges burning. Covenant lowered her force staff slightly. You have one chance, Stark. One opportunity to prove you can work clean. You will be confined to a purified forge chamber. The Null Maidens will remain with you at all times. You will build under constant observation. And if I see even a hint of corruption, I will end this experiment and execute everyone involved. Fair enough, Tony said. He looked at the burning remains of the Mark 7, his greatest achievement in this universe, now reduced to toxic slag. Let's do it right this time. The battle for the Forge world lasted 3 more days. The Chaos forces, denied their prize and frustrated by the Mark 7's destruction, threw everything they had at the defenders. Space Marines fought in corridors slick with blood. Imperial Guard regiments held choke points until the last soldier fell. The tech priests turned the forge itself into a weapon, using industrial equipment to crush and burn the invaders. Kairos Mindweaver led the assault personally, wielding sorcery that bent reality and broke minds. But without the corrupted armor to claim, his forces lacked direction. Tzeentch did not reward failure, and the sorcerer could feel his god's attention turning away, seeking other pawns in the eternal game. On the 3rd day, Imperial Navy reinforcements arrived from a nearby sector. Their bombardments drove the Chaos warships from orbit. The surviving cultists and traitor Marines retreated to their vessels and fled into the warp. Their mission failed. Throughout the battle, Tony worked. The purified forge chamber was small and bare, nothing like the magnificent hidden forge where he had built the Mark 7. The tools were basic, the materials standard. The 2 Null Maidens stood like statues in the corners, their presence creating a dead zone where the warp could not reach. In their shadow, Tony's mind was his own again. He could think clearly, without whispers guiding his thoughts, and what he built reflected that clarity. The Mark X Aegis was not beautiful. It was not elegant. It did not make the observer gasp in awe. It was functional. The design was modular, built in sections that could be assembled by workers with basic training. The power source was a simplified arc reactor, less powerful than his personal version, but stable and reliable. The armor plating was standard ceramite, the same material used in Space Marine, armor for 10,000 years. The weapons were Volkite calivers and bolters, proven Imperial designs. But the innovation, the real breakthrough, was in how it was meant to be used. The Mark X was not designed for a single pilot. It required a crew of 3, a pilot to control movement, an engineer to manage power distribution, a gunner to operate weapons systems. No one person had complete control. No one person could be corrupted and doom the entire machine. It is ugly, Epsilon 7 observed when the first prototype stood complete. Compared to the Mark 7, it is crude and inelegant. Yeah, Tony agreed. But it'll work. And more importantly, it can be built by your people, using your methods. Every component has been blessed according to Mechanicus rituals. Every connection point includes prayer circuits. I've made it compatible with your faith, not fighting against it. Covenant examined the armor with her inquisitorial eye, looking for hidden corruption, secret symbols, anything that might indicate chaos influence. She found nothing. The design was clean, simple, almost boring in its straightforward functionality. Test it, she ordered. 3 volunteers from the Forge World's Defense Force were selected. Not Space Marines this time, but normal humans. Imperial Guard soldiers who had distinguished themselves in the battle against the Chaos invasion. They climbed into the Mark X, each taking their station. The armor came to life with a low hum. The arc reactor glowed softly, nothing like the blazing brilliance of the Mark 7. The crew moved through basic operations, learning to coordinate their actions. The pilot walked the armor forward. The engineer balanced power between movement and weapons. The gunner targeted practice drones that flew through the testing chamber. It worked. Not spectacularly. Not with the godlike power of the corrupted design. But it worked reliably, predictably, safely. A single Mark X suit could not kill a war boss, but a squadron of them working together could hold a defensive line against impossible odds. "How many can be produced?" Covenant asked. Tony pulled up schematics on a data slate. "With the resources of this forge world, maybe 50 units per year. But the design can be distributed to other forge worlds. Across the Imperium, you could potentially produce thousands annually. It won't change the course of wars, but it'll save lives. Give regular humans a fighting chance against threats they couldn't face before." Covenant was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded once. "This is acceptable. The design will be submitted to Mars for approval and distribution. If the Fabricator General agrees, it will become standard equipment for elite Imperial Guard regiments." "Just like that?" Tony asked. "No more talk of execution? No mind-wiping?" "You have proven yourself," Covenant said. "Not through brilliance or innovation, but through humility and sacrifice. You destroyed your greatest work because it was corrupted. You built something lesser because it was pure. These are the actions of someone who understands the true nature of this universe." She paused. "However, you cannot leave this forge world. Your knowledge of uncorrupted arc reactor technology makes you too valuable and too dangerous if chaos were to capture you again." Tony had expected this. In his world, he had been a prisoner in a cave in Afghanistan, then a prisoner of his own fame, then a prisoner of his guilt over Ultron. Now he would be a prisoner of circumstance, confined to a single planet in a universe not his own. "I can live with that," he said. "On one condition." Covenant raised an eyebrow. "You are not in a position to make demands." "Not a demand, a request." Tony gestured to Epsilon 7. "Let me work with him. Let us establish a proper training program for building and maintaining the Mark X suits. Let us teach others, so the knowledge doesn't die if something happens to me." The Inquisitor considered this. "Acceptable. But understand, Tony Stark, you will never receive recognition for this work. Your name will not appear in Imperial records. The Mark X will be credited to the Forge world's traditional development processes, blessed by the Omnissiah through proper ritual. You will be anonymous, forgotten." "Good," Tony said. He meant it. The thought of not being Tony Stark, famous genius, was oddly freeing. Here, he could just be a worker, just a builder. Jarvis would have hated this place. No quips. No press conferences. Just war. But maybe that's the point. Sometimes the armor isn't about the man inside. Sometimes it's just about the shield. The years that followed were quiet ones, by the standards of the grim darkness of the far future. Tony Stark, whose name became known only as Artisan 7 Inches Forge World Records, worked alongside Epsilon 7 to establish production lines for the Mark X Aegis suits. They trained tech priests in the simplified arc reactor technology. They developed maintenance protocols that balanced Tony's engineering principles with the Mechanicus's ritual requirements. The suits spread slowly across the Imperium. Elite Imperial Guard regiments, the Stormtroopers and Kaskin, received the first production units. Reports came back of successful deployments against Orc raiders, Tyranid vanguard organisms, and minor chaos incursions. The Mark X did not win wars on its own, but it turned defeats into stalemates and stalemates into narrow victories. Lives were saved that would have been lost. Tony worked from a small workshop in the depths of Metallicus Prime. The space was cramped and dirty, nothing like his mansion in Malibu or his tower in New York. But it was his. No cameras, no reporters, no shareholders demanding quarterly profits. Just work. Epsilon 7 visited him one evening as Tony was calibrating a new reactor core. The Archmagos had changed over the years. His mechanical components had been upgraded, blessed, improved, but his human eye remained, watching Tony with something that might have been friendship. "I have received word from Mars," Epsilon 7 said. "The Fabricator General has formally approved the Mark X design for mass distribution. Within a decade, every Forge world in the Imperium will be producing variants. Your work will touch 1,000,000 worlds." Tony set down his tools. "And my name will appear nowhere in the records. Is that a complaint?" "No," Tony said honestly. "It's a relief. In my world, I was always trying to prove something. To my father, to the world, to myself. Here, I don't have to prove anything. The work speaks for itself." "You have found wisdom," Epsilon 7 observed. "That is rare in any universe." They sat in companionable silence for a while, two friends from vastly different worlds who had found common ground in the simple act of building useful things. Outside the workshop, the Forge world rumbled and roared with industry. Millions of workers labored at tasks they would never be remembered for. Their names would fade. Their faces would be forgotten. But their work would endure. Tony thought about the Mark 7 sometimes, about what it could have been, about the power it represented, about how close he had come to unleashing something terrible on this universe in his arrogance. The memory kept him humble, kept him focused on building things that helped rather than impressed. A young tech priest apprentice entered the workshop, carrying components for the reactor Tony was building. The boy, barely 16, had shown aptitude for understanding arc reactor principles. Tony was training him, passing on the knowledge in small, manageable pieces. "Master Artisan," the boy said, using Tony's Forge World title. "I do not understand this connection. Why do we route power through this junction when a direct path would be more efficient?" Tony smiled. It was a good question. A smart question. Because efficiency isn't everything. The indirect path includes a buffer that protects against power spikes. It's slower, but it's safer. In this universe, safe and reliable beats fast and brilliant every time. The apprentice nodded, absorbing this wisdom. He would go on to train others, who would train still more. The knowledge would spread like ripples in a pond, each circle wider and fainter than the last, until no one remembered where it started. Just that it existed. Just that it helped. That night, Tony dreamed for the first time in years. But this dream was different. No whispers, no corrupting influence, just a memory of another life. He saw his workshop in Malibu, saw Pepper smiling at him, saw the Avengers assembled for one more mission, saw his daughter Morgan running through the grass. He woke with tears on his face. Those people, that world, were beyond his reach now. He would never see them again. Never hold Pepper. Never watch Morgan grow up. The portal that had brought him here had closed behind him, perhaps forever. But in the darkness of his small quarters, Tony did not despair, because he understood something now that he had not understood before. Heroism was not about power or recognition or legacy. It was about doing what needed to be done, even when no one would ever know you did it. In his old universe, Tony Stark had been a hero who saved the world and wanted everyone to know about it. In this universe, Artisan 7 saved lives one suit of armor at a time, and his greatest achievement was that no one would remember his name. As dawn broke over Metallicus Prime, Tony returned to his workshop. There was a new order for 50 reactor cores. A Forge world 3 sectors away needed replacement parts for their Mark X units. The work was endless, unglamorous, anonymous. Tony picked up his tools and got started. In the corner of his workspace, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, a small symbol was etched into the metal of his workbench, the arc reactor design. Not glowing, not proclaiming his genius to the world, just a quiet reminder of where he came from and what he had learned. Sometimes the armor is not about the man inside. Sometimes it is just about the shield. And sometimes that is enough.